everybody. What's up? Who are you?
Dude, I'm your boy Groomies. Who you?
I am Kid Lips, aka E, aka the Love Extremist. Hyped to be here today. We are going to talk about if print on demand is right for your brand. Okay, so some of you already know print on demand, aka POD, is essentially also known as made to order, or
it's also commonly confused with the term like drop shipping.
Drop shipping,
which,
there you go. Yeah.
Is filling orders that you don't hold, but it's not making orders. But yeah, a more generic way of thinking about the print on demand is like manufacturing on demand, or making your products only when you need them made, or you've already sold them.
Yeah, and a common misconception is print on demand is just print. And in some cases, you may go to a company and that's true, but not all, right? Applique is all about offering a bunch of wraparound services, including labeling and embroidery and all different types of printing and patches and all sorts of stuff that you can do, hood liners, pockets. So there's a lot more that goes into print on demand when we talk about it. And it's important to recognize that print on demand for your brand doesn't just mean a print on a garment and it's out the door.
Yeah, no, I think like just couching it that way, no pun intended, is super important, right? Because then you can kind of get to a more clear analysis as to like whether or not it can fit and it can work for you, and work for your brand, right? So Great. So anytime we talk about kind of print on demand in this video, we're really referring to like manufacturing on demand, making your product only when you need it. And typically that's done in the local market that's as close as possible to your customer.
And there's also a lot of big online resources for doing this, right? You can go to Shopify and hook up any number of print on demand resources, and it can hook up to products, and you can put your designs in and they can manufacture and fulfill. You never touch product. And I know as someone who has started brands before, there's kind of an association with that being the jank. A little bit like, you know, like, come on, like if you're gonna have a real brand, you gotta cut and sew. You gotta make your stuff from scratch. Yeah,
if you didn't burn that screen with your own eyesight,
right,
it's not yours.
Right. So. And then look, respect to all the purists out there. You're doing it, and if you went to fashion school, you know how to do all that stuff, amazing, and use those resources. That's super important. And there's no shame in the POD game.
No,
let's be real.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there are a ton of, like, what I would even think about is like misconceptions there. I think a lot of it has to do with like, well, if somebody else is making your product, you never know what's going out. So a lot of it is like maybe on that like perceived kind of quality side. Mm-hmm. I also think it comes into play like a lot of times people confuse print on demand with drop shipping, which is like, hey, some factory in China is going to send it directly to my customer and Lord knows what I'm going to get. But that's not always the case, right? A lot of the manufacturing on demand resources are, you know, here in the US, they're US based companies. And I think that there's a lot of ways that you can kind of tackle the quality problem, right? Like ordering a sample for yourself beforehand and checking it out.
Definitely.
So I don't think you could just sit there and say like, just on quality's sake alone, categorically, I can't use print on demand. I would think that that's like a little bit of a short-sighted way of thinking of print on demand. I think, yes, make sure you have the quality you want in your print on demand manufacturing partner, but it's kind of like up to you to set like what your bar is for quality in terms of how you want the product to look and act and feel and how long you want it to last and all those things. But I think you'll find that in the US here, if you want to make product on demand, especially apparel, there's a ton of super, super high quality ways to do it. Like sewing a patch on a crew neck sweatshirt. Like that thing's never going to fade. It's not going to peel off. It's part of the garment. Like that thing will last forever. Sewing a patch on a hat, right? Like, or adding a woven label to a product. There's a ton of options that are extreme, like longevity in terms of quality and presentation quality. So you can't just sit and evaluate print on demand on quality and say like quality's not there. Like it's a false statement, or you're not thinking broadly enough about print on demand.
It's pretty incredible the amount of ways we can embellish a product today that can happen in your backyard, in your city, or close by in this country, and you still get a good quality product.
On demand.
On demand, exactly. I do want to roll it back and contradict myself a little bit, because that common conception that it's just printing is not true. And it is important to talk about what printing means in print on demand, because there's certain types of printing that are much harder to do on demand. For example, unless you're running your own screen print shop and you can just screen print a tee one at a time, you're likely gonna need to hold inventory when you run a screen print run. But digital printing, right? Direct to garment, DTG printing, which is what we run most of our orders when they're printed here, is another type of printing, and there's a lot of misconceptions around that. And that's the common way that print on demand happens when you print on a garment.
Yeah. So it's kind of like this confusion between a way of doing business or a strategy of doing business, which is like, hey, as much of my product I want to make on demand because I don't have a ton of money to spend on product up front, with being understood as I can only use a service or a way of printing called direct to garment printing,
right.
which isn't necessarily true. I mean, you could be doing print on demand and only doing embroidered products, right? And never use direct to garment printing.
And I do want to give some space. Let's just give some space to what direct to garment printing offers you, right?
Yeah.
Direct to garment printing offers you this opportunity to have a printed product and to get it out the door quick, get it out the door with the print on demand model. And there's some trade-offs that you may have between a direct to garment printed garment and a screen printed garment or other types of printing. And that's why that sampling that Ian mentioned earlier is so key. You got to get your sample and be excited about what you're getting and feel the quality to know. And right now, the technology for direct to garment is so good that if you're printing on a nice cotton product with a fine weave, you're likely going to get a pretty solid print.
Yeah. I mean, you've touched on a lot of the reasons why DTG is really good in print on demand, like no minimums. You can print just one, not really economically viable on screen printing. It's very forgiving in terms of your artwork. You don't need to do all your color separations. You can take a picture of your grandma sipping sweet tea on the porch and print that if you wanted, right? It takes down a lot of the kind of artistic barriers, if you will, or creates a more open playing field for artistic expression. And then overall, like the environmental responsibility of direct to garment printing is actually really strong. Screen printing, even if you're doing like discharge printing, especially if you're doing discharge printing, there's just not that many ways to make screen printed products that are as environmentally conscious as direct to garment printed products. It's just that ink system and that approach to doing things. It's just like built into that package where you kind of need to do a lot of jumping through hoops and a lot of assurances in terms of the exact things you're using on screen printing to even start to get to that point of environmental responsibility. Like a lot of water-based inks still have kind of harmful chemicals in them when you're talking on the screen printing side.
Right. So let's make one product at a time instead of 50 at a time and have to throw out 10 because nobody's buying that 5XL, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big point. The other thing that I want to think about in context of the printing is also age, right? As things age, how do they age? Yeah. And you get to make a choice about that depending upon the print type you choose. But generally speaking, with DTG, they fade, right? Over time with washes, DTG prints tend to fade. And that can be a choice because a screen print will usually chip and flake. And that's a whole different vibe, right? So do you want the chipped and flaked t-shirt after 50 washes? Or do you want the more faded shirt after 50 washes?
I think another kind of conception is that brands age in a specific way. So like, look, when you're getting started, oh yeah, print on demand can make a lot of sense. You don't have a lot of money. As you get to be successful, maybe you do bulk runs, or then you get into full cut and sew, and everyone wants to be here because if you're doing full cut and sew, you're also big and established and you've made it and you're successful. And I just think now more than ever, that is quickly becoming untrue. I think you start with print on demand because it's affordable and it's fast and there's not a lot of capital and you can get product out there and start moving. And as your brand grows and matures and you become successful, you can add things like bulk manufacturing and add things like cut and sew. But I wouldn't necessarily think that you would completely get away from doing on-demand manufacturing. And there's a bunch of reasons for that.
We were just talking about a customer of ours who we used to work with, helped them grow, all print on demand. Then they went to cut and sew, and now they're coming back and realizing they have this great cut and sew business, but they want to add to their collection with stuff that they can rely on, that they can get locally, that they don't have to worry about supply chain issues because they're manufacturing overseas, and print on demand offers that. And so if you keep it in your arsenal as you're building your brand, you actually have all of these resources that you can come back to and be consistent sellers throughout. And we see this with most streetwear and apparel companies in general. They work off blanks for headwear, for basic tees, for
basic
joggers, basic hoodies. There's always going to be that. You go into a modern streetwear store, I don't care what brand it is, and they're going to have that lower price point, kind of still dope looking product that's consistently there. And they're getting it likely from a manufacturer just like you would, that's doing print on demand. Then you have the premium stuff and
full cut and sew.
Right. And that's great. And you may be waiting a while to get that, right? So while you're waiting to get it, 6 months, a year, because production timelines are way out, especially if we have more pandemic challenges, it's great to have your print on demand dial.
Yeah, I think it's like as you start to scale up your brand and you're doing, like, let's say you're doing millions of dollars of apparel a year, you start to look at it through a lens of like, how do you mitigate risk on a single supply chain? If I'm using one or even two factories in Southeast Asia or China, well, what if that factory gets closed down because of COVID? What if there's shipping delays? What if my container is sitting out of Port of Los Angeles for 6 months? Are we just going to stop selling?
Right.
It's like you have to kind of think about resiliency of supply chain and like what backup options are. Or even, let's say you have an established clothing brand and you want to drop a collaboration with a new artist you just met last night. Do you want to tell them like, hey, we could start getting products in 6 months or in 4 months? Because if you're going overseas, those are the time frames to produce in mass and to ship it on an ocean freight container.
Right.
Whereas for some of these things, you want to be able to put up quick wins. Like, hey, I want to get this collection live this month. Well,
Bust it out.
You're not going to be doing a full cut and sew run for that type of project. So I think print on demand or manufacturing on demand makes a ton of sense for established brands. You just need to, isolate that to the right set of collaborations or the right set of products, or use it in the right time frame. Like, hey, it's our backup plan if something else goes awry or we're hit with delays on our key products.
And what I love about Groovy's is he knows how to nail the business nerdiness, logistics, all the economics, all the important stuff about a brand. Here I come in as a creative artist, I want my thing to be pure, right? I want this thing to be my own unique product that nobody else has. All right, I get it. With creativity comes with constraints, right? We need constraints to be creative. And I think there's something really valuable and valid in recognizing that there aren't that many constraints with print on demand anymore. You can put a label all over a product to make it your own. You can put a design that could be anything, any image, either as a print or as a printed fabric that becomes a pocket or a hood liner. You could embroider so much cool stuff. And it's not just squares on chests anymore, right? Like there's arms going on here. There's like hems, there's inside necks. So it's really interesting to recognize that this industry has come far along, and it's only going to go further in offering the type of tailored custom products that make your brand stand out without having to do that whole cut and sew rigmarole. So if you can let go of your purism a little bit and find the creative spirit in these limitations, I think you actually can really thrive, not just on a business level, as Groovy's was mentioning, but also on a creative level.
Oh, thanks for bringing that perspective to the table. That's why we keep them around. The one other challenge I think you hear a lot, especially from like new brands and even semi-established brands, are just like margins are tricky on print on demand. That stuff is expensive.
Yeah, that's fair.
And you want to kind of help me pick this one apart a little bit?
So margin is an interesting thing, right? Margin is really like the profit you're making after all the costs. And there's a lot of different ways to calculate that. It depends on the complexity of the art you're making, the complexity of the design. Certain print-on-demand products you can mark up and have super high margins because all they are is a blank with a label on it, right? And then like that label...
You just like totally shattered the mold. You like went right after it. I love it.
Yeah.
I think that the preconception, like the where the challenge comes about, right, is like if you look at the cost of, hey, I'm going to screen print 100 of these, or I'm going to print one on demand, you're like, oh, dude, doing one on demand on a margin basis is way worse than printing 100. I think part of it is like how much hidden costs are there.
Right. You have to ship each one of those 100 shirts. How much time does that take? How many shipping materials are you going to have to hold on to for that? What about warehousing? Are you going to take up your entire closet and your parents' closet too? Like, where are you going to keep this stuff?
What about the ones you don't sell?
What about the flood that happens in your closet and all of a sudden you've lost 50 pieces of inventory because it's covered in mold, right? Like, these things happen, and to put the burden on your manufacturer saves you a lot of headache, saves you a lot of money in the long term. So it may not compute up front, but if you think about it as a business plan, it does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and the other thing that you touched on is like, I think a lot of the preconceived notions are also on like, well, hey, I'm going to take this shirt and I'm going to print on it 87 times in 27 different locations. And I think a lot of the margin is controlled by the approach to design.
Sure.
And like you were talking about with constraint and artistic constraint, there are absolutely ways you can make margins on, products on demand and have crushingly high margins, like
Amazing.
even higher than cut and sew margins. So I think it's less about the technique that you use to manufacture it, and it's more of like an intersection between like the technique you're using and what that design is, right? Like a one color print running 1,000, screen printing is always going to be the cheapest, right? It never makes sense to do direct to garment printing in that case, unless environmental reasons. But but like on a photograph of your grandmother drinking sweet tea, that one might never make sense at any quantity to do on screen printing. So it's like there's different approaches for different designs that make a lot of sense. And you just have to think about from your brand perspective, hey, this set of products can work really well on this set of manufacturing infrastructure. And if you want to have an open conversation with your manufacturer, I definitely encourage you to do that, because good manufacturers will tell you like, hey, this screen printing is probably not the best technique to use there on this particular design. And I would really kind of key in and pay attention to those things, because they're essentially trying to help you optimize their infrastructure for your brand.
And we've talked about this before, but what you charge really depends on the value you build in the brand that goes far beyond just a design. You always want to have something bigger. You always want to have some story. You want to have maybe some give back component, some responsibility there that goes more than just, hey, here's a cool t-shirt. Certainly that can work for a while, but ideally you're making a brand that people want to buy into and want to pay you what you think it's worth. And maybe you value that higher and they value it higher, and you can charge a little more and make better margin. There's a lot of huge companies that do extremely well print on demand, and it's definitely something worth considering.
Yeah. What other kind of preconceived notions do we have out there around whether or not print on demand should be good for the brand? The little traps that people set and fall into.
I think people assume they're going to get a product with the blank manufacturer's label on it. And
like the whole brand, like, is this really my brand or not?
Right. And it's funny. I'll go into like a streetwear store, one of the top of the line streetwear stores, and I'll like look at the neckline of a t-shirt and I'll be like, oh yeah, they cut out that label and put a new one. And we can do that for you too. And you can also just rip a tag and print a label, and you can make it fully yours. And that's totally legit. Like, there are ways to have this product not show any other brand name but your own. And some companies are able to do that. And, I'm proud of Applique that we can.
Yeah, me too. I mean, we went like super deep on the product branding element.
Yeah.
What we're working on right now is like the brand experience components. Like, what is the packaging that it gets sent in? Ooh, what's the hang tag? Ooh, is it folded in a nice piece of tissue paper and shipped in your paper polymailer, right? Like, I guess not a polymailer, it's a paper mailer at that point, but you guys kind of get the idea. We're like adding that whole brand experience component onto it. And it's just about getting the infrastructure set up to kind of keep track of all the odds and ends there.
Totally. I think there's also a ton of questions that we're not answering here and we're probably going to forget. And that's what the comments box is for. So we want to hear from you. Get involved. Hit us up. This is something we talk about and think about all the time. And hopefully we can be a resource to help you, whether you're working with Applique or not, to understand what the best approach is for your brand or a particular product line you're about to drop.
Yeah, and I think like the golden rule with print on demand is there's a place for it in every brand. It just comes down to understanding like the mix, right? Like, oh hey, it's a backup strategy if cut and sew or overseas production gets delayed. Or hey, for our headwear, it makes a lot of sense. Or hey, for this collection of products, it makes sense. Or for this collaboration, it makes sense. So just understanding the tool that you have in the shed with manufacturing product on demand and knowing when to grab the right tool, right? Like when you jump into a project and you don't have the right tools for the project, there's just nothing more infuriating than that. So I would just keep in mind like the different ways that you can use on-demand manufacturing and make sure that you don't have blind spots in your supply chain, and like build the most resilient and the best supply chain you can and tap into on-demand manufacturing when the time is right. and for the right projects.
I think once you pass the threshold of selling like 50, 100 units a month, you're going to want to have a relationship with your print-on-demand provider. You don't just want to have to spin them up in the off chance that you're going to do a project. You ideally want to keep having that relationship, running product through them, so that when your business starts to pick up or when you have a new collaboration, you already have that speed dial, that email access to customer service, that artist support that you can get to know, all right, we're going to get this thing done, or hey, I need this sample pretty quick, but that means I'm going to run 1,000 units through this in the next couple months. Like, that type of relationship is really important when you have a good print-on-demand provider. And now more than ever, having relationships with your manufacturer is key so that you're not pushed down the side. So that means just keep product flowing through it if you're going to make it part of your product mix at all.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. It's just like some of the basic things like setting up supplies. Like some supplies can take a hot minute to set up, like getting your woven labels and having those set up, having embroidered patches on hand that you can use, for an upcoming collection. You kind of want to pre-bake some of those things so when you need them, they're there and available, and you can like tap into them right as you need. But
this guy brilliant,
dude. Thank you so much. It warms my heart. But yeah, guys, we just want to think with you guys through some of the ins and outs of when on-demand manufacturing is right. I hope this conversation has been helpful for you. If you guys have questions about, hey, how can I get higher margins with print on demand? You guys were talking like it's great, but I don't see it. Like, hit us up in the comments below. Give this video a quick like and a thumbs up if any of this information was helpful. And don't forget to subscribe to Apleek's YouTube so we can give you a little notification when we drop a new video.
Subscribe, like, share. We love you. Bye.